Welcome to Local Edition. Brett Pomerantz here on the west side of Los Angeles. We're joined today by Wayne Powell. He is a councilman in the city of beautiful Manhattan Beach, California. And I want to speak about that beauty because it really is a remarkable place. I've been going there recently. My daughter has a new friend who lives in Manhattan Beach, and it's really remarkable. But I do notice a couple of places there seem to be abandoned houses. There's an abandoned property here and there. And I'm wondering, what can cities do in California when that occurs?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Brad, because I had an initiative. We had our first reading at our last council meeting of the ordinance, and we'll have our second reading, and it'll become law soon. And it's called the Statement of Intent for Abandoned Properties.
Okay, and so what does this do? Because, look, if someone owns land, as long as they're paying property taxes appropriately, I presume that there's not much a city can do if the person doesn't want to develop the property, or is there?
And that was the problem we were having. And of course, the value of the land, particularly in Manhattan Beach, is appreciating rapidly. The Statement of Intent ordinance, which was fashioned after San Diego and has been the model for many other cities, including Detroit, the owner has to give an intent as to how they're going to remediate the property, particularly if it has weeds, boarded up windows, as we have a couple in Manhattan Beach. But more importantly, they have to give a timeline as to how they're going to develop the property or sell it to someone else who will develop it.
And so what happens if they do not provide that information?
Well, if they refuse to do the statement of intent, it's a misdemeanor under the new ordinance.
Okay.
And then when they give the timeline...
So what if they do then provide the statement?
Then the statement says, here's the timeline as to how we're going to remediate the property and then develop the property. And it has to be a reasonable timeline. And if they don't follow it, there's significant monetary penalties, which is the disincentive to them.
Right. Can you reject the timeline? Can the city reject the timeline?
Yes, the Community Development Department would review that statement, and if it's unreasonable, they can reject it and say, go back to the drawing board and come up with something more reasonable.
How do we get to a place, though, where there's not an abuse here by a city, where the city's not acting in such a way that they're trying to force development when maybe the person doesn't want to engage in that?
There's always the courts, that's the ultimate arbiter of the, any dispute. But in the cities that have that ordinance, it works very well.
It does.
And usually there's not abuse.
Right.
A city wants a property developed. Particularly, we have a Rite Aid.
Yeah, tell us about this location. For those of us that know Manhattan Beach, the location you said, it's prime real estate. Tell us where it is.
Yeah, it's on the intersection of Sepulveda Boulevard and Manhattan Beach Boulevard. It's a gateway to our city.
Truly.
Yes, and it's been vacant for 7 years, more than that actually. And part of the property has an old liquor store that's boarded up, and we've had homeless people from time to time, and they've let the property, it looks like a visual blight. It's something that you wouldn't expect, certainly in Manhattan Beach.
Especially at that location. I mean, it's prime real estate. And I presume that whoever the tenant is, they're paying their rent, so the landlord's not complaining. The landlord is paying property taxes, so there's not that avenue to take through the county, and so now this is the approach you can take.
Exactly, and we had a nuisance ordinance that we actually...
Yeah, what about the nuisance?
Well, we updated that so it would be more enforceable and had more teeth, but that apparently didn't work, and that's why we went to the statement of intent.
Okay, I want to talk about another element that city governments face, and that is the weight of pension obligations. As you know, some of your sister cities, San Bernardino, Stockton, Mammoth Lakes, Vallejo, they have faced tremendous financial crises leading to bankruptcy in some cases because of the weight of pension obligations. Is Manhattan Beach facing that type of potential crisis?
Well, fortunately, Manhattan Beach is, we have a well-managed, prudent financial management. And in fact, Manhattan Beach is one of 2 or 3 cities in California that have a AAA bond credit rating. But a number of other cities could be teetering on bankruptcy due to the unsustainable pension liabilities. Some people refer to it as a ticking time bomb.
But I want to talk more broadly about this notion of pension liability and pension obligations. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the attraction to work for a public entity is the pension, because public entities have been so strong in providing outstanding public pension benefits. The private sector, not as much, and the private sector seems to be pulling away from providing defined benefit plans. The trend, therefore, because of the way you describe, is that the pension benefits of public entities are not as generous. So are you concerned that if the public sector continues to go down that path, public employment becomes less attractive?
Well, it used to be in the old days that in government, it didn't pay as well as the private sector, but you had lifetime job security and good pensions. And then the private sector went to 401k plans, defined contribution plans as opposed to a defined benefit plan. But then salaries escalated in government work. And when you have, let's say in public safety, an employee that could retire at age 50 with 90% of their single highest year salary as a pension, that's not sustainable in the long run.
So what should a city do? What should a county do? What should a state do?
Well, it's more on the state. As far as what cities can do, in Manhattan Beach, we did have pension reform, but it had to be negotiated with the various unions. And
on a go-forward basis, you can reform. You can't look backward.
That's a good point. And so it won't apply for retirees for some time, but we made employees pay a share of their retirement benefits. We also decreased some of the assumptions, like the retirement age. People are living longer, but we can only go so far. At the state level, they had in 2013 the Pension Reform Act, which didn't go quite far enough. In fact,
arguably.
Yeah. But what a lot of people are saying is it's time for the state, and all of this, as you mentioned earlier, is going forward. You can't go back in time. Those are vested
Although
rights.
there are folks that are trying to look into whether they can. There have been pension reform initiatives floating around that would allow renegotiation. Whether those would survive scrutiny, it's hard to know. I want to briefly, in our final moments, talk about you. You have a radio show called Powell to the People. You talk to constituents. What are you hearing from your constituents?
It's just sort of what we've mentioned, pensions.
Is it?
Some people look at the state and federal government, which is entirely different. Both sides of the aisle can't get along. In Manhattan Beach, or in all cities, city councils are nonpartisan by state law. And so we know who elected us, and we know who we work
You're
for.
You're closer to the people.
Exactly.
What else are they talking about on your show when they call in?
Well, they talked about the blight. I have special guests. I had Senator Ben Allen, and he was talking about a relatively new Senate bill, 415, which requires us to move our election to the general election date to get higher turnout.
Although the flip side is it could be more expensive for you to reach more voters because the voter pool will increase, so there are pluses and minuses to both. I want to thank you so much for joining us. He is Wayne Powell. He is a city councilman in the beautiful city of Manhattan Beach, California. My name is Brad Pomerantz. We thank you so much for staying with us.